On specific topic of water governance and policy. And we are still continuing going down this journey of climate resilient pathways, adaptation, mitigation, and sustainable development for Pakistan. Now we have concluded, today we have concluded successfully two very interesting sessions, one on environmental flows, which shed light on potential new avenues for exploring ecological, socioeconomic matters that can also support not only ecosystems but also people. And before lunch, we closed also the session on integrated water resource management and governance in the context of climate change. So now we are opening session number 5, and we're looking at one of the big elephants in the room. We're actually looking at issues of flood and how to build resilience in the wake of climate change. And for that, it's really my pleasure to introduce our moderator for the day, someone that definitely doesn't need introduction, Dr. Claudia Ringler, who, as you might very well know, received her PhD from agricultural economics from the Center for Development Research from Bonn University in Germany. And of course, someone with extensive research and practical experience on topics related to water management, to agricultural management, natural resource policy, and many other issues related to sustainable development. In interest of time, I think I'm going to leave it to that, but Dr. Claudia, please take it away.
Yeah, thank you very much for the kind introduction. So this is a unique session today. It's one of the sessions in Pakistan Water Week, Recurring Floods, Building Resilience in the Wake of Climate Change, with a focus on South Asia. But it's also one of our monthly online talks called NEXUS Gains. So we actually today have a very large online audience that are regularly participating in our monthly events, and they come from across the world. And I think they all would like to learn what Pakistan is planning to do to address the current flood crisis, but also future flooding that I think we will hear more about expected as a result of the glacier melt and climate change. So I really welcome everyone to today's sessions, both online and here in the room. And please, we'll have two exciting speakers. We have several panelists who hopefully are in positions to turn things around for a climate resilient Pakistan, for a climate resilient South Asia. And if you do have questions for our speakers, if you do have questions for our panelists, please hold them. So we will take some questions after each of the speakers. We'll also obviously have time for questions to the panelists. And for our online audience, please just type away. We will take your questions throughout the session. So thank you again. I think I don't need to introduce what the flooding was about. 33 million people affected, about 10% of the entire country flooded, severe long-term impacts in terms of education, health, undernutrition, agricultural productivity, food import dependency. These impacts are still accumulating, and I think our goal is to ensure that such adverse impacts from flooding will never occur again, because for sure the type of flooding will continue into the future. With no further ado, I would like to now introduce our first speaker, Dr. Santosh Nepal. Dr. Nepal is an eminent scholar of hydrology with deep expertise on climate change water interactions in the Hindu Kush Himalayan region. Prior to joining the International Water Management Institute earlier this year, he worked as a water and climate specialist at the International Center for Integrated Mountain Development, or ICIMOD, that many of you are probably familiar with. Dr. Santosh has a PhD in hydrology and climate change from the Friedrich Schiller University in Jena, Germany. Please all give a hand to Dr. Santosh Nepal for our first presentation. And the presentation is titled Climate Change and Its Impact on Melt Runoff, Floods, and Agriculture in the Indus Basin. So we are now first taking a look into the future. Thank you very much. Dr. Santosh, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Claudia, for the nice introduction. Slide, please. So by the time the slide will come, my presentation will cover the why Indus is very important. The title that I'm putting is that why Indus matters. The melt runoff, flooding, and agriculture in the face of climate change. Okay, you see, Indus matters for many different reasons. It has huge water resources, glaciers, snow, but as well as there is a vulnerability component, as you can see here, and we have been hearing about this flood, and this entire session is also dedicated in flood, which brings Indus very important. And in the morning session in environmental flow, we also heard about these upstream downstream linkages, and I think that's perfectly fits into the Indus Basin context. As you can see that in the upstream regions, the Indus is full of glaciers, snow, and ice storage. And in the midstream and is the most of the anthropogenic activities, and that's where the river connects the upstream to downstream. That's where the river has a vital role in terms of connecting the upstream and downstream resources. But it is equally important to provide that water resources to the downstream regions. So what happens in downstream in terms of water for agriculture or industry, that actually comes from the upstream regions. So that there is a very strong upstream and downstream. And when river flows from upstream to downstream, there are opportunities, like you can see that the agriculture, hydropower, glacier and snow melt, irrigation, navigations, but as well as there is a challenges. The challenges in terms of glacial lake outburst flood, avalanche, floods, erosion, sedimentations, and groundwater depletions. So that's where it's very important to understand the function of the watershed in terms of how important it is. So how do we really measure whether the river basin is very vulnerable or it is very important? There are certain criteria. In terms of importance of the water towers, that's mostly the upstream part of the basins. You can look at the role of the upstream, we call it water tower, in terms of supplying role from precipitation, snow, glacier, lake, reservoir. And then the downstream dependency for domestic and industrial demand, so how much water is actually coming from the upstream part, and downstream dependencies of ecosystem and irrigations. So that actually shows the importance of the river basins. And you can also look at the vulnerability component of the river basins, how vulnerable the basin is in terms of water stress, in terms of governance effectiveness, hydropolitical tensions, future climate, and socioeconomic changes. So when you put these things together, then you bring the critical water towers, whether the water towers is critical or not. And that's what we did in 2019 and 2020. We published this in Nature last year. And we looked at the importance of vulnerability of the world's water towers. We actually look at the global water towers index for 78 global water tower units. So I'll show you the results from these assessments. The first figure that you are seeing is the supply index. So how much water the different water towers is supplying to the downstreams, okay? And in the Asia and Oceanic here, okay, it's not working. Okay, here is the Indus. Second, the first one is the Tibetan. From the supply point of view, Tibetan Plateau is the highest supply in Asia and Oceanic. And you see in other regions also there is a very other important water towers which actually supplies more than the Tibetan Plateau and Indus. But if you look at the balance side again, and here you see that the Indus is again on top. The downstream requirement of natural, industrial, domestic and irrigation demand supplying from the Indus water tower is again stood second here. And here interesting is that the demand, from the demand perspective, Sabarmati is again the first one. But here in the supply side, you see the Sabarmati is towards the end. So that's where the difference is. Okay, so from the Indus perspective, Indus has a balanced mix of precipitation, glacier, snow, and surface water, and it has a high sectoral demand in the downstream areas and high irrigation demand. And here comes the, how do we assess the vulnerability? So we looked at the vulnerability from the different perspective, the hydropolitical tension, changes in GDP in the future, changes in population, governance effectiveness, projected precipitation temperature, and baseline water stress. And the picture here is that the, some of the few water towers that we have picked, Indus again is one of the most vulnerable river basin in the world. Okay. It's because the population in Indus, 235 million, is projected to increase by 50% in 2050s. Basin GDP is projected to increase nearly 8-fold by 2050s. Temperature is increasing 1.9, and precipitation has a variability. In a year, not much increasing, but there is a variability, decreasing in some season and increasing in some. That makes Indus the most vulnerable basin in the world. Okay, so here you look at the, again I'll concentrate on the Indus, which is on the left side here. The present, how does the present hydrological regime look like in Indus? And Indus has a very strong glacier component, as you can see here in the red bar, which is coming like more than 60–70% of the melt runoff contribution to the discharge. And similarly, snow melt here, the contribution is again more than 20–30% from the snow melt. And here you can see the, in case of Indus, 63% of the melt runoff actually originates from the snow and glacier melt. Okay, and in comparison to Indus, the other basins like the Ganges and Brahmaputra has a less contribution of the snow and glacier melt, but they have a more rainfall runoff. So that means more flooding characteristics there. And this is very relevant to the recent flood that you have observed in Indus basins. And what we have looked at here and published in 2007, we looked at the 50-year return period of flood events and how it will change in the future in the context of climate change. Here you can see that the RCP 4.5 moderate scenarios and then the business as usual scenarios. And in Ganges basin, you see that the 50-year return period flood, the mean relative changes will increase by more than 50% in some of the tributaries, and in some tributaries more than 100%. But in case of Indus, there is a slight increase in some main Indus river network, around 50%, and in some of the western basins like in the Kabul and some others, there is a slight decrease as well, especially in the RCP 8.5 scenarios. So this is a very important indicator because most of the infrastructure that we build is actually based on these indicators of 50-year or 100-year return period of the floods. And now the entire definition of the 50-year and 100-year return period flood will change in the future in the context of climate change. So we have to also look at that. And not only that, we are actually observing a lot of cascading disasters. The Uttarakhand flood in 2021, which is one of the typical nature of the cascading disasters happen in the mountain region. And in Melamchi flood in Nepal in 2021, again, is another event. And here, I think probably in the Indus, it's also impacted by the compounding risk, which is already well explained in the IPCC AR6 assessment report. This is the work that we published in 2019 in Nature. And here we saw the importance of meltwater in the Indus agriculture systems. And here you can see the mean annual contribution of snow and glacier melt to discharge. As you can see that this Blue River network, which is more than 70–80% of the melt runoff contributions. But if you look at these dashed areas in the downstream plain areas, which is actually the irrigated field, then you see that the mean annual contribution of snow and glacier melt to irrigation water supply is more than 40–60%. And in some of the seasons like spring, 60% of the water withdrawal that you withdraw from the irrigation from the river network in the spring season is actually originated from the meltwater. So that's that shows the strong meltwater dependencies in Indus basins. Okay, and here you see that we also look at the different crop and how this crop use the meltwater for the different development period. And then the crops like sugarcane and cotton, you see that the melt runoff contribution is more than 50% and 70 and 80% in certain period of the crop growth. And that shows the importance of the meltwater in the crop calendar. And here comes some figures that you will, I think, enjoy. That in Indus basins, I picked the rice as an example, the red bar here. The 15% of the annual 19 million tons of rice productions can be attributed to glacier snowmelt. Okay? And similarly, in case of sugarcane, it is 17% of the 53 million ton is actually attributed to the meltwater contributions. And that contribution is slightly less in the Ganges basins. Okay, so here I think the important thing here from the resource management perspective is that how does the Indus look like after 50 or 60 years? So definitely more number of people, which requires more resources and which requires more water resources. And here you see that the population will increase by 50% by 2050s. Sorry, there was a typo in the earlier slide, which is reading as 2016. Basin's GDP is projected to increase by 8-fold by mid-century. There is a climate change component, temperature will increase, more variability on the precipitation. And this strong growth in population and economic development actually demands fresh water, which for other and different welfare resources. And no need to mention that the Indus also has a very strong hydropolitical tensions among the countries shared by the Indus, and that also can exaggerate the situations. Okay? And there is a considerable increase in domestic water use demand, as you can see here, nearly double. The energy requirement is doubling, and then the food requirement is also kind of increased. So to manage this limited water resources under climate change, under more uncertainty, is a big challenge. And again, in Indus, snow is a very important. And we looked at the Panjshir catchment in Afghanistan. Panjshir is famous for many different reasons. We looked at the future snow cover, and here you see that the future snow cover is consistently decreasing under different climate change scenarios, whether you have a wet scenarios, whether you have a warm or cold scenarios, the snow cover is likely to decrease consistently. The implication of that, very interestingly, is in the winter season and then the spring season here, the discharge, the melt runoff is likely to increase in the winter and spring season because of higher temperature, the melt runoff will start early. Okay, and in summer and autumn it will decrease. I think this is very important from the adaptation point of view, that how can we adapt in a changing environment. Okay, the last slide. From the same work from the 2022, we actually published in Nature in terms of how the contribution of meltwater and groundwater in Indus in the present and future time period. As you can see here, the first bar is the reference period, and then it shows the contribution of meltwater to irrigations in the green band. And you can pick the contribution like cotton. As you can see that the dependency of cotton productions will be more in the early melting seasons, because of the higher melt coming from the glaciers, early melting process. So that is, I think, for cottons is more dependency on meltwater. And for wheat, as you can see here, again, wheat column, and then you see that the contribution of the groundwater to irrigations, for example, in wheat production also will consistently increase in the future. So there will be more dependency of the wheat productions on the groundwater, so more pressure on the groundwater. Okay. So the last slide is the takeaway message that I see is that the Indus is again like most vulnerable and most critical water towers at the global scale again. So there are a lot of challenges happening. Changes in climate and other socioeconomic changes will have a marked impact on water resources and agriculture. And what we have already seen and observed, climate change and extremes has a big hit on the Indus, and it will likely to increase more uncertainty, more variability. And climate change impact is actually cross-sectoral. And we cannot resolve only one sectoral problems by only looking at the sectoral silos approach, because we have to look beyond the sectors. For example, agriculture. If you want to resolve the problem of agriculture in the context of climate change, you cannot resolve that by only looking at the agriculture sector. You have to look at beyond the meltwater and other sectors which are also utilizing the waters. With this, I will end the presentation. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Dr. Santosh, for really an exciting presentation. And we'll take one urgent question, if there is one. Either from the floor, okay, and also online. Is there also one online? No? Good, so then we take from the floor. Do we have a mic for our participant from the floor? That would be very helpful because we have the online audience. And while the mic is moving to the participant in the, here in the room, my question to you is, what happens when the meltwater has run out, when there's no more glacier to come down? I guess I'll ask all the panelists later too, but you can maybe also tell us. But please introduce yourself and your question to Dr. Santosh.
Hello. My name is Saidur Rahman. I worked in IMI, so just it was very interesting presentation. As ADB is conducting the previous session, you have seen the vulnerability, you have highlighted the vulnerability of Indus Basin. So what do you think, where Pakistan, we are a poor economy, so in the whole system, from your study, what lesson we observed that where we should invest to control these floods and these presented the glacial meltouts. So what do you say?
Okay, two easy questions. So Dr. Santosh, over to you, just 1 minute because of time.
Okay, 1 minute, 2 questions, 30 seconds each. Okay, the questions from Claudia is the when the melt run out, and that's a very important question because there are enough studies which has already indicated the phenomenon called peak water. So because of the higher temperature, the glacier will have an accelerated melting per unit of area. And after some times, when the glacier storages diminishes, and then the flow start decreasing. And that time period for Indus is around 2050s and 2060s, and it can go up to 2080s on different climate change scenarios. I think that is another challenge that we'll be facing. We are already discussing that we are actually having a big problem managing water resources under current conditions. Imagine after 50 years, where many of us will not be here by that time, but imagine that we'll have a more number of people, we'll have more resources, more GDP, increased GDP, and then which requires more water to the production of food and other resources. So I think that's a big challenge that we need to also look at.
Okay, I didn't hear the answer, but I guess the panelists will tell us the answer. So please to the second question.
Okay, from the vulnerability point of view, I think there will be more uncertainty in the climate change context. So that means that the hazard and disaster that you have seen probably will have more frequent in the climate change context. What we need to do is that I think the twofold strategy could be that building our early warning systems more robust, and then more focus on the adaptive capacities, especially working on the vulnerability side, reducing the sensitivity, and building our adaptive capacities through the legal reforms, through the policies, and other kind of different approach. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Great answer. Very good. Okay. Very quick question because we do have a Q&A session.
I'm Dr. Aslam, professor in Civil Engineering Department, University of Lahore. Yeah, just not question, clarification for myself, education. In the beginning slide, you mentioned about surface water, snow melt, rainfall, like this. I was just wondering that there was not groundwater. So just I want clarification, In one slide you showed.
Yeah. There was a groundwater on the downstream side. I think that's what you're referring, right?
It was there, but I think the question is if you are modeling groundwater recharge with reducing meltwater. Are you integrating groundwater, surface water modeling in your analysis?
No, my point is,
groundwater was there.
One of your slide, you listed surface water, rainfall, snow melt, glacial melt.
Yeah. On the supply side, yeah.
In that list, I was saying that if in this water tower, groundwater
has no role.
We haven't included that yet.
Okay, great. Thanks for this important clarification. We'll take other questions after the next presenter. I'd like to invite now to the front Dr. Mohsin Hafez. He's an integrated water resources management and modeling expert with the International Water Management Institute. He's heading, obviously, the office here in Pakistan, also Central Asia. He has an illustrious career before joining EMI at various institutions in the UK, Australia, Germany, the International Rice Research Institute, and of course EMI. He has authored and co-authored nearly around 200 scientific publications, and he has a PhD in hydrology from the University of Bonn, Germany. So Dr. Hafez, the floor is yours with our second presentation that brings us back from the future to the current situation, talking about systemic approaches to mitigate water risks in the Indus Basin in a changing climate. So if we could have the slides, please, for Dr. Hafez, and the floor is yours.
Thanks, Claudia, and good afternoon, everyone. Santosh made my life a bit easier in terms of presenting what's happening in the future and what kind of the risk which we are dealing with. One of the questions is about how we could deal with this kind of the water risk in the country and what we can do differently, and then the out-of-box solution that will be able to helpful to us for restoring that one, to deal with the water risk in the changing climate. So I will be talking about that one. Okay, if we are looking, first we are looking about that, comparing the 2010 and 2022 floods. Before May, we were always talking about the super flood, and that was, we were referring about 2010 flood. And then that was the thing. But then if you're looking around now in 22 flood, that is much more worse than that one. Then we forget about this 2010 super flood, but we are now talking about 2022 super flood. And the 22 super flood is basically more on the rainfall, as well as also on the riverine flood. But the major problem is there that there was not a lot of flow of water going out from the system, and still many areas the water is standing. If you're looking around in terms of numbers, 33% at one point on one given day, 33% of area was inundated. But if you look around a longer period of time, it's around 15 to 20% of the area, or some are reporting 10%. But 33 million people have been impacted, and around yesterday the number has been quoted by the Ministry of Planning and Development, around $32 billion that the economic loss. If we are looking around in part of Pakistan, that the flood, we have a long history of that one flood. So this is not the first time. Starting from 1950, we have that one, in 1957 floods, and then later on in 2010, and now we are again dealing for it's on and off. Typically in any given year, we are facing it 9 months drought and 3 months kind of the flood extreme there. So what we could do differently to deal with this kind of risk? Again, one of the major issues there in the 22 flood is that's impacting on the food security. The major crops which were grown in that one in Kharif, rice, cotton, and sugarcane were badly affected. If you only talk about the sugarcane as the rice crop, 80% of the loss is there, and rice is also a lot of consumption in country and also exporting a lot, the rice crop. Here that's showing it basically that the maps of the area and then which crop is damaged and how much area is damaged there, and the extent of that one is shown on the maps. If we are looking around, we looked around in comparing the 2021, that the normalized difference vegetation index for the month of the August 2021, and here that's showing it that the NDVI, if it is green 0 to 1, it is showing it that the highly vegetation. But when we look around in 2022 for the same time period, we are seeing it a lot of water standing and not the green vegetation. And in terms of then we looked around that the difference of that one, in terms of the losses there in green biomass, that includes all sort of things. It's not only the crops, but it also includes any kind of vegetation. And we clearly see that one there, the red one are the one which the area it should be normally on the green one, but it's extreme damage, a severe damage, or the damage. So those are the things that are there. That's reflecting that one, how much is the damage of loss, and many of the areas still standing water there. Okay, this is a map showing it the part of the Sindh, what's happening in 10th to 20th of September. So this is showing that one, the water bodies are the standing water, and again showing it from 1st to 10th of October and 15th to 20th of October. Still the water is standing there, and many part of the area in part of Balochistan and Sindh, the water standing. It will take a couple of more weeks, maybe 4 to 6 weeks before the water will recede, and the people will come back to their hometowns and everything. So these are all extremes. We know that one, but how we will prevent that one? And that's where we need to go back into the Asian Water Development Outlook, which was a study was done by Asian Development Bank in 2010, where they looked around five kind of indicators: rural household water security, economic water security, urban water security, environmental water security, and water-related disaster security. And today I will be talking about the water-related disaster security, which is dealing with the climatological risk, hydrological risk, and meteorological risk, and see how we are standing in the context of all the countries. Here on this one, they are basically all the Asian Pacific countries, and then that's showing it which stage we are, whether it's fully functional on that one. And when we are looking in terms of Pakistan, Pakistan falls under number 3 from the bottom, not from its lowest performing in terms of disaster. When we're looking around further in depth in that one thing is clear. We have hardly given any attention to disaster risk. That includes floods and then the drought. And today we'll be focusing on the floods, how we could prevent on that kind of the floods, and how we could come a more robust solution to overcome the future, to prevent the future risk there. Typically, one of the biggest things is we are taking that one, in the Indus Basin, we have the provinces, we have the federal level. We are not treating the Indus Basin as a system level. We need to treat the Indus Basin as a system level. Holistic picture is there. Typically, that the different ministries, they are working around that one. We have 30 days of storage. Climate variability is only functional at the federal level, but at the provincial level, we don't have the entities there. Then also on the downstream of that one, we are taking into the silos, and all irrigation department is working in silo and everything. What we need to look around in a bigger picture thing, holistic thing, all is important for it's a mosaic. And when we are developing any solution, we need to look around that one, what will be happening on the deforestation in the upper part of Indus Basin and Swat, and how that will be impacting downstream in Sindh. Now, because these are all connected there, now with the remote sensing, satellites, digital information and everything, we got lots more information that could provide us information at system level. If we want to deal with the climate risk in the Indus Basin, we need to link up really thinking about Indus as a basin and treat the basin as a whole. What we can do it, obviously we are talking about system level approaches. System level approach is one of the approach which we are already is working around water, energy, food ecosystem nexus challenges, the approach there. Obviously that approach has a lot of challenge, but also is very critical when we are talking about the rural livelihood, food and nutrition security, and economic and system level, which are strongly connected. It provides us a platform how we could connect with all those sectors there, and also deal with the climate change and other changes which are happening in the area. Often when we are talking about national institutions, they are working in their own defined area, and then the regional institute, they struggle on that one, how that could be transboundary things will be connected. And Indus Basin is a transboundary basin which is connected. Investors are uncertain how and best, how that the forest will be there, and how that forest will be linking with the sustainable irrigation, clean energy, and agro-processing need. And on the top of that one, like in the recent one, the women are the more girls and most vulnerable groups are seriously affected. So that's where we need to adopt the system approach, and system approach will be helpful to provide us some of the answers. What that system approach means, we are talking about the water security, we are talking about the water is one of that area. And then we also looking around the food security, and then also on the energy security. These are the 3 security we want to have optimization, but their external factor like population growth, Indus Basin is increasing, climate change, and then the governability, how these things are working together. And in the NEXUS approach, which is bringing the people, economies, and ecosystem as a central part of that one, whatever the solution we are developing it, that's centric to the people, economies, and one, it's truly integrated. It's a bit different than the IWRM. Here we are working on many actors and many stakeholders involving everything there in importance of political economy, how political willingness is there as a country level. Like in the previous session, we were talking about water, we need to consider water emergency. But that's important on the political economy, willingness and everything of the government sector. It's also linking with the farm scale level to the landscape level to watershed to the basins, providing a connectivity and the multi-centric approach. And it's important to include gender, youth, and inclusion as a part of that one. Now I'll be giving a few examples from other regions, what has been done. Again, basin approach is about quantification, accounting of WEFI resources, upstream, downstream interdependency, which has been explained by Dr. Santosh, and then the shared benefits and everything. This project is working in 5 countries, And I will be talking about the Indus Basin and giving some of the example of the Indus Basin system level. First thing is we need to go for the water risk identification. We need to go identify the risk based on the hazard data, based on the historical data, flood area, how much is that one, analysis and change, identify the hazard. Then seeing how that was exposing to the asset and vulnerability. Then quantify the risk, then we need to reduce the risk and doing that early preparedness system, emergency planning and response activity, and then we could talk about the risk transfer, how that could be, but that will be only happening when we include the governance, policy, institutional arrangement, and linking with the capacity building of the government institute, and also developing those kind of the product inclusiveness and everything together there. There are a lot of things, the big data approaches, the remote sensing, satellite, the on-ground data that could be used. I will not go into those much into the details. Giving some of the example in the coast, in India, we have developed a kind of the climate screening product for investing in the disaster. That giving this idea about when the flood area, which area is more flood prone and everything, and how we could deal with the extreme rainfall hazard maps and everything. That kind of product also need to be for part of Pakistan. Giving some example that the dual benefits from the large-scale groundwater recharge and use. One of the example is in the Bengal water machine. Around 16 million smallholder farmers in the Bengal Basin in Bangladesh were facing the flood, and now that has been reduced the area there, reduced the flood potential as well as store the water for dry season through pumping and recharge. And then between 1988 and 2018, around that, the flood area has been reduced around much more that one, and this amounted to account around 75 to 90 cubic kilometer of water capture. Again, the sponsity of the China is another example which has been explored as a part of that one. How we could improve that one, improving the resilience using the natural and then the grey infrastructure solution, and how that could be improved. Giving one example in part of that one, in Islamabad, which we have looked around the demonstration of nature-based solution, building a small lake, and that was able to, that water was going into the downstream and creating a flood inundation city. And for 5 months of data is showing around 1.8 million of gallons of water which could stored and reduce the flood hazard. Again, giving some of the example in India, which was looking around the Gujarat and Uttar Pradesh of the area fluctuation of water table, and how we could, if we could add on some of the recharging of the water, and that will be able to deal with the improving the groundwater, and that water could be used over a period of time and more for the irrigation when we need the water. And this is underground teaming of the flood for irrigation pilot. Another example is innovative subsurface solution for transforming water-related risk into the opportunity for building resilience. Again, some of the examples there at the small scale level and how that could be upscaled to the system level using the smaller approaches there. And that has been adopted and working around that one. Okay, just some of the things, just working on the last slide is that one. We need to look around the integrated storage perspective, thinking about the small dams, as well as the large dams, and also thinking about the lakes, wetlands, groundwater, soil moisture, and all those things will be connected together. And that will be a storage system. We need to think about how we could combine different systems there, and that will provide us the storage services of increased water availability, flood mitigation, and regulating flows, and overall helpful for us for managing the future flood risk and everything. Obviously, that need to happen at the Indus Basin scale level. Last thing is, we'll be developing under that one the hydrological modeling that will be able to guide us about some of the risks there, and doing some of the scenarios trade-off, what will be the best option, and how we could do it, and how we could consider the Indus Basin ecosystem, doing the environmental flow assessment and utilizing of integrated water storage. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Please, a hand for our second speaker, Dr. Hafez. I think he provided a lot of maybe the answers to some of the questions for the first speaker. Do we have an urgent, okay, same gentleman before we move to the panel, and do we have an online question this time? No, okay, our online participants are quiet so far. We have to, anyway, motivate them more.
Dr. Mohsen Hafiz,
please.
Based on his vast experience, I mean, we have these floods. First major flood was in 2010, and after 12 years, as you have shown, that we have more damage. So where we have, I mean, in your assessment, actually where we have failed in the system level approach, what are the key issues, I mean, you see that should have been dealt you have been dealt to control the floodwater?
I think we have done so many things wrong in a way. We don't have a disaster risk for the warning system at the country level. On the top, we have a poor planning, and on the natural manways, natural river waterways, we have built the infrastructure, we have built the hotels and all the industry there, and that's creating all the catastrophe. Then the last thing is, if I need to point out, then the left bank outfall drain, and that one, that is not fully functional. I mean, the water needs certain pathways. So we didn't have that one. If I need to top categorize, we don't have a flood warning system in terms of, especially for the Rodkoi area, for the hill torrent. We don't have, we are poor planning, we are working only in silos. So we need to combine at a system level and saying it, what's happening on the water availability, and then how we could develop the outfall drains need to be functional, left bank outfall drain and right bank, and that's important. I will stop there.
Okay. Oh, okay, because we didn't take you last time. So one final question, and then we will move to our eminent panel, please.
Yeah,
and introduce yourself.
My name is Jalal Qureshi. I am a professor of environmental science and geology in Houston, Texas. I am just working like 40 years in a different part of the world on water sector project, Haiti, Sri Lanka, and not Sri Lanka, South Korea, and in US as well. I am here in Pakistan since like 2 months and working in a flood areas. I just few hours before I just came from Balochistan, and I work in Sindh last month. I am just thinking that in 2012, there was the water policy of Pakistan. And also there is a sustainable goal of the UNDP. So all the experts are there. They were not prepared for the flood control thing. Similarly, what I am just looking last night, I went in many flood areas where the people have no food, no water, no shelter as well in Balochistan and Sindh. And I did not see any kind of any innovative technology anybody are using for the flood frequency, like a flood analysis. This is a digital world. Nowadays, it's very easy to prepare the slides and a lot of data and how do you play with the computer. But on ground, what is the situation? Situation is that I was in Karachi. More than 80% of Karachi roads are broken. Mosques are broken. Balochistan, their schools are totally destroyed. What will be the effect? The two things are affect. One is the mental tension, which will create the more crime in Pakistan. That is a very serious issue. The second, in Balochistan, yesterday I saw that their agriculture is totally full with the water. It is an acid rain. It's not a similar water. The water quality is more than 4,000 TDS. And nobody can wash the hand. And even the animal, they are drinking that water, they are dying. And that lands will not develop in next 4 or 5 years. And there will be a future food crisis because there will be no rice, no wheat or other things. Animals are going to die. So I expect that today's conference must be focused that how they can control the crimes rate in Pakistan. The second, how they can transfer the technology, innovative technologies which the other countries are using for the floods. I did not see anything that they have to be used for the similar kind of an emergency thing. Even the disaster management were not ready. So that's my humble
contribution.
Request. Thank you.
Okay, wow, yeah, that's a very strong and comprehensive request. And I think we'll hand the answer over to actually our panelists. And I would now like our speakers to step down and our panelists to come up. And I would first like to invite Mr. Nathan Reeve, a water resources specialist with the Asian Development Bank. Is Mr. Nathan in the room? Yes, perfect. Yeah, as soon as the panel is invited, we'll bring the answer. We'll deal with it. Let's invite the panelists. If you could take the seat wherever you would like. So Nathan is a senior climate change specialist in the Central and West Asia regional department of the Asian Development Bank, where he works on climate change policy, economics, and science. And he holds a PhD in environmental science and policy. And I think as such is very well equipped to explain to us how Pakistan can deal with the current, but also with future flood crisis. Our second panelist is Mr. Faisal Farid. Is Mr. Faisal here? He's a civil servant by profession. And yeah, he has been serving in many positions with the government of Punjab. And as you have seen from the earlier maps, Punjab is one of the provinces affected by the floods. And my understanding is you also have experience with disaster risk mitigation. So I think very important to hear from you. Our third panelist is Ms. Kanwal Walker from the International Water Management Institute. She has a background on gender and inclusion, and we have heard issues of crime. We know that women and children are often most affected from adverse climate change impacts in terms of access to health services for children. We know a lot of children have drowned. We know that women and children are particularly affected by undernutrition from extreme events, both heat stress and floods. And so we very much look forward to her expertise and comments in that area. Our next panelist is Engineer Ahmad Kamal, and he is the chairman of the Federal Flood Commission Ministry of Water Resources. And I think on his shoulders rest most of the answers that our panelists might have today. So feel free to ask away how he's going to address all of these challenges that Pakistan faces today and in the future. And our last but not least panelist, I believe, is online, is engineer Habibullah Bodla. He's the chief engineer with the Punjab Irrigation Department. And we know that irrigation infrastructure has been very hard hit by the current floods. We've also heard as a result of the melting glaciers, there might not be a lot of irrigation water for the irrigation system of the Indus Basin irrigation area in the future. So it would be, we look very much forward to hearing from him on how he is addressing that decline in future meltwater. And before we hear from our distinguished panelists, am I missing one actually? No, I think we have everyone. There is Muhammad Arif Rashid Goher. Did he arrive? No, he has not yet arrived. So we continue. Before we will hear from our distinguished panelists, we heard there are now some online questions. Yeah, could you please tell us what the online question is?
Thank you. There is one question from Mr. Khavar. He's asking that PMD, Pakistan Meteorological Department, was expecting around 60% more rains than average. But we have faced more than 400% rains. So what could be the reason, let's say, and flood risk and climate-related hazards with that?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Let me try to respond to this question. As a matter of fact, the seasonal forecast that was made by the Pakistan Met Department, that had worked out about 40% of above normal rainfall. Our normal rainfall is 140.8 millimeter, and they base this seasonal outlook in line with SESCOF, FOCRA, and couple of other regional models worked out jointly by these countries. However, it turned out to be more than 175% on an average at a countrywide basis, and over 475% at the level of Balochistan and Sindh. Let me share with you that these forecasting models, based on which the seasonal outlook is made, are not that much competent to go for that much of a high sort of, you can say, above normal rainfall. And that is the point where we have arrived at the conclusion that this is really a climate impact issue. And for that very reason, one of the participants here raised that how well we can improve the technology and all that. I kept this thing for my talk, but let me say it now, that now we need to have a sort of a nowcasting rather than the forecasting. Nowcasting is something which provides you the information even for the next 1 hour to 3 hours or even to 6 hours. So rather than going for 24 or 48 hours of forecast, we must now work out for all those vulnerable areas where much more flash flooding is expected. We need to have the techniques of nowcasting and things like that. Thank you.
So are you saying this will not happen again because we will have better forecasting next time?
No, I don't think so that it is not going to happen, because we are now very, apparently in a very active phase of apparent climate change. Not to say for anybody, but for Pakistan, surely it is here. And unless and until we improve our technologies and we improve our governance structure, let me share with you that the technological departments or the technical departments, probably they are the one who have got the most or much of the deprivation with regard to technology and with regard to the capacity building over the last 2 decades or so. So the biggest lesson this 2022 flood catastrophe has taught us, that unless and until we put more good blood, more fresh, you can say, education and technology tools in our public sector department, as well as, sharing our hands with the private sector, we are not going to fight that.
Okay, thank you for this additional very important comments. Before we move to the next set of questions, I have a question to the 2 panelists opposite from me, and I would like to ask both a little bit more. We've heard a lot about the extreme impacts on poor people, the extreme impacts on vulnerable people, the extreme impacts on women and girls. We know, that at least 1/3 of the people who have drowned were children. So again, what do the most vulnerable populations and people affected in rural areas of Sindh, Balochistan, KPK, partly Punjab, what do they need now? So maybe first over to our gender and social exclusion expert, please.
Yeah, hello everyone. Thank you very much, Claudia, and all the panelists for giving me this opportunity to express my views. So, okay, I'm going to bring in the social aspect in this discussion, in this very science and facts and figure discussion. So from the recent floods, we all know that the vulnerable component of our society, women and children, are most badly hit in it. Although we have policies, although we have facts, figures, but the implementation of those policies and implementation of those interventions with the right stakeholder, I believe, is the biggest challenge for us. We are like in the mode of science where we have digital innovations, we have technologies, but how these technologies we are tailored to communities. This is the main challenge we are facing. And if we look at the upper part of Indus, in the northern side of the Indus, then majority of male out-migrated from that side and female left behind with the children as a main custodian of the agriculture and their households. So in case of disasters, they are the most vulnerable segment of our society who badly hit by it. So while looking at the policies or interventions, I believe that these should be more focused community-based interventions, community-based policies which focus You can say the gender responsive policies, like if we talk in the case of floods, then we should go towards the community-based flood early warning systems. If we talk about the digital and mass awareness, then those should be very targeted to the basic communities, and we should keep in mind that even in the communities, the rural communities where women are illiterate, they doesn't have even access to mobile phones or internet services, they are not allowed to use it. So those things should keep in our mind while designing our policies and interventions. And in recent floods, as for your question, the female and the children, they are facing a lot of issues in terms of challenges. We can say in the floods, women are facing health issues, basic sanitation issues, then also very waterborne disease. So all these things should be kept in our mind while designing our disaster response strategies. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think a very important area where we need to focus more on. So Mr. Faisal Farid, Mr. Provincial Disaster Management Authority, who needs to take the next steps to reduce impacts on these most vulnerable people, please?
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me in this very important discussion. Well, the simple answer is that we all need to basically take care of this climate change phenomena, whether as a common man or as a public servant, or if you are a certain specialist or even an expert. It is the responsibility of all of us to take steps to reduce the risk about this climate change. Well, I will just augment some of the previous discussions, which was about taking the steps to save the vulnerable populations. We are gathering the data right now about the losses and assessing the damage assessment in the field. The most precious loss is basically the loss of lives to the people. And we have 232 deaths in Punjab, and out of them 181 deaths are due to these roof collapse. So investing in the resilient housing is one of the major interventions that need to be done. What we are going to do this time is that we are providing ex gratia assistance to the people whose houses have been damaged or who have lost their houses or their houses have been destroyed. So this is a good amount of money. For example, for a brick house it is 400,000 rupees, and for a mud house it is 200,000 rupees. But at the same time, what we are doing this time is that we have got a kind of building plans from the experts that are not more costly, that basically the range is about from 300,000 rupees to about 600,000 rupees. And we are going to give these plans when we are going to transfer the cash to these people. And then we are going to monitor that whether the houses which are being built by these people from this amount is basically resilient, so that we can save the lives of the people in the next disaster. We have also gathered the long and lat of these particular houses as well, so we can easily monitor the reconstruction phase in various phases by our respective departments. Secondly, the major loss was basically the loss of livelihood in the rural areas. According to an estimate which the crop reporting team of the government of Punjab has provided, that about 487,000 acres of crop have been damaged in entire Punjab due to this monsoon activity only in this year. And the total loss in financial terms is about 86 billion rupees. It's a huge loss, and the government doesn't have the coping capacity in financial terms to basically to compensate the farmers for this loss. So, but generally the farmer definitely need the support because they have very small land holdings and their everything has been washed away. I was there in district Rajanpur when the district was hit by the flood. So I've seen people coming out of their homes have been damaged, they have nothing to eat. They were under the sky on the roadside, and their entire livelihoods have been washed away. So the government basically definitely would come up with a policy proposal to somehow give ex gratia assistance to the farmers so that they could reinvest that for the next crop. But there are certain other solutions as well. In Punjab, there is a kind of crop insurance scheme which is based on area indexed yield. At this time, its extent is quite less. That is only 1 or 2% of the small farmers are basically being covered under this scheme. But we intend to upscale it further. And the government basically at the initial stage may be giving the dividend or to the to the small farmers basically, so that the extent of that crop insurance or livestock insurance may be enhanced. One other thing is that the community have also lost the seeds which were available to them. They generally store the seeds for the next crop in their own godowns, which are also made of mud. So there is a new initiative in Punjab and maybe in the other areas taken by the State Bank of Pakistan, that is e-warehouse receipts financing. So what you can now do is that you can basically send your crop to those silos where it will be safe, and then you can take the receipt and go to the bank and get the finances against that crop. The banks generally give 70 to 80% of the total market value of the crop at that particular time. So in this way, they can save their crop for the or save their seeds as well, and at the same time, they can sell their crop when the market distortions are away because of the supply glut. So this crop losses can be managed in this particular fashion. My colleague, she basically talked about the basic steps to be taken for the vulnerable population, especially for the female. We have got all the data sets of the pregnant women and the lactating women in the Punjab province, especially in the 2 districts which were badly hit. And our field teams of the lady health workers and others, they are basically reaching out to these female population, and we are taking care of the health issues as well. This time, there was no outbreak of malaria and there was no outbreak of dengue in these particular districts because our health departments were working quite well. The other step which need to be taken, basically, that also include improving the early warning system, especially for these hill torrents, and also for the eastern rivers as well. We do have very good data for the western rivers, but in Punjab, there is for the river Ravi, Satluj and Chenab, we are dependent upon the information coming out from our neighboring country. So we need better surveillance radars, maybe in Sialkot district or in Lahore. So one more thing, that our district administration basically plays a very vital and critical role in disaster management. And they are under capacity in a sense in terms of human resources. They don't have any GIS expert with them, they don't have any disaster expert with them, and they don't have any even technical expert with them. They only rely upon the information which they gather on the phone calls or through WhatsApp messages. So now we are planning to basically build the capacity of our field formation. We have established District Emergency Operations Center in each district of Punjab, and we are now in the next phase giving them the experts and the human resource and the technical knowledge, and upscaling the multi-hazard vulnerability assessment that would be available with them so that they could act accordingly. Thank you very much.
Okay, very extensive programs in Punjab, so I hope that Balochistan and Sindh that got more affected have the same level, quality, and intensity of programs to address the current floods. Yeah, excellent. So I think I heard there was another question online, and we might also have a question in the room, but let's quickly online. Yes?
I think the question was for Dr. Mosan, and he's not here. So maybe we can ask at the end of the session.
Okay. If not, you can still, I'm sure they could answer as well. Do we have a question on the floor before I continue my own questions? Oh, I think we need at least 2 questions from the floor because we need some diversity. There must be someone else who has a question. No, not yet. Okay, we'll take you in the next round. And when you find someone else who also has a question, and who's not your neighbor because he also asked a question already. Anyway, as you know, I guess I have 2 questions. You know, what is the number one investment that is needed to avoid, obviously not the floods, we can't avoid them, to avoid the same level of damage to society, economy, nutrition. For me, number of stunted children is a very good indicator. If we come out of this flood with a reduction in the number of stunted children, we have done things right. If we don't, we have not done things right. So what is the number one investment to come out of this flood better, given that we'll have the next flood, so to avoid negative impacts? And my second question is, given that the meltwaters will run out sooner or later, in fact, I was a bit shocked to hear from Dr. Nepal that we might be running out between 2050 and 2080, then all this water, you know, that is essential to grow a lot of the crops in the Indus Basin irrigation system will be gone. We heard there might still be groundwater to maybe substitute for some of the missing meltwater, but obviously we know groundwater is also declining in parts, and other parts is saline. So what will Pakistan do about that? And I think we'll start maybe with the second question, and our online panelist, engineer Habibullah Bodla. He's the chief engineer of the Punjab Irrigation Department. So what is the irrigation department doing to ensure that adverse impacts on crops are avoided in the next floods? And then how is the irrigation infrastructure changing to a future where you do not have meltwaters? So it would be, we cannot see you on video right now, but it would be great if we could see you, or at least hear from you your answer, please. Yeah, he's currently shown as muted. Is he? Oh, he's self-muted, okay. Okay, so let's maybe then first, let's first ask our panelist Nathan from the Asian Development Bank. So what is the number one investment that where you would put your money in, given that you are from a bank? Where would you put your money into to avoid these large adverse economic and social impacts from the floods? And what do you think Pakistan should be doing when those meltwaters are gone? What would you change in Pakistan's agriculture infrastructure? Because most of the meltwater is being used in agriculture. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. Appreciate being invited on the panel. And I also appreciate the diversity of the panel itself. And I particularly comment on the combination of having the chairman FFC here, as well as provincial representatives and also social expert. I think it's oftentimes we miss out on the social dynamic or step there. So to answer your question, if I may, I'm going to sidestep a little bit, but I will answer your question in general terms. As we know, there's a post-disaster needs assessment that has been prepared with the government of Pakistan. And ADB has been working with World Bank, UN, and other bilaterals to prepare this. And a sort of clear, quite stark picture from the floods has come out of it. And of course, the details of this will be released in due course, and I won't go to the details. I think Mohsin already mentioned that the number of around 30 billion that is coming out. The priorities are already indicated in there in terms of the near-term priorities, in terms of mentioning some key nutrition aspects that need to be concerned, that are concerning. So the PDNA is prioritizing 3 areas on housing, livelihoods, and agriculture. And livelihoods and agriculture are an important one. because I believe one of the commenters in the audience mentioned about the upcoming Rabi season, and if we do not have adequate growth in the upcoming season, we have knock-on effects that cascade into subsequent seasons. So there's this immediate need on the agriculture side to support restoration of production, bringing back to the level and more resilient approaches to agriculture. More broadly, it's clear that there's a need to ensure that we don't find ourselves sitting back here 10 years' time, wondering what should we do about this flood, which, based on the trends for climate change, we expect monsoon rain to be increasing further under climate change. That next one may yet be the catastrophic, cataclysmic, largest flood ever. And certainly the country cannot afford to absorb a single flood like this, let alone a recurrence of floods. And I note the perhaps purposeful mention of this in the title. So the way certainly we are thinking about this is the need to think about flooding as a more broader strategic issue. And it's not sufficient for us to look at piecemeal, fragmented, project-based approaches that perhaps have gone on in the past, and certainly we may have seen in previous ADB projects where we have done so project here, project there, based on earlier priorities from the government, and certainly from our perspective and coordinating with the other development partners on this, working with the government, federal and provincial government, to find a more strategic approach, trying to link not only a single project, and certainly not trying to attempt a single big bang project, but seeing where we can find entry points in finance, entry points in health, entry points in water that will allow us to ensure resilience across the board. That's certainly our vision. I think it's not a small job that one person, I certainly take care of a small portfolio. It's not certainly large enough, and I certainly don't see myself as being certainly someone who can solve from one perspective. It's going to take a lot of sectors and a lot of individuals and a lot of investments. Going back to the original comment on question around early warning, I think in terms of bang for the buck, early warning systems are probably among the best. But that said, technologies are one thing, and it's one thing to have the hardware, and it's one thing to have the maps. The question is, where does that interface with society and people who are involved and who need to use it? Can we say that the hazard maps being prepared by the respective development partners and respective agencies at the district level have actually been used to inform design, inform land use planning, etc.? Can we say that perhaps it could have been done better, could have been done differently? Could these be distributed in a different means, on the web, paper-based, pamphlet-based, etc.? So that interface is an interesting one, and there's a story that has come out in the post-disaster needs assessment about how the information flow has come down from the federal level down to the NDMA, PDMA, and then the DDMAs, many of which are not full-time, as we understand, full-time positions or full-time agencies, and may not be fully constituted at the district level. And ultimately, it's at that district and community level that it matters most in those early hours of the disaster. So I'll stop there, and
Okay.
Apologies for the sidestep.
So so I heard, forecasting, flood risk forecasting, disaster hazard risk forecasting is important, and then projects that fill little gaps and niches, or big gaps and niches. That is the approach that we have heard, the suggestion. I think we do have Engineer Bodla now with us. So, Engineer Bodla, if you could tell us, what is the one thing you would do to ensure that the adverse economic impacts on irrigation or on irrigation infrastructure and agriculture from floods will not reoccur? What's the number one investment? And are you already planning on new cropping patterns when the meltwaters are gone? So over to you, Engineer Bodla.
Thank you very much for the invitation. During the last about 12 years, first of all, we received the unprecedented flood in 2010. In 2010, still I remember that on 29th July, we received the information that we will be receiving the flood at the 6 p.m. and we received the information at 11 a.m. So you can well imagine that whenever you are going to receive the highest flood ever received in the Indus River, you are receiving the information just a few hours ago. And definitely it caused many problems and even it damaged the infrastructures. But this time in 2022, we received almost the same kind of floods in the river Kabul. But we were quite aware, and I would like to appreciate the role of the Federal Flood Commission. We were having a better coordination with the Chashma authorities and also with the Tribal authorities. And that's the reason the riverine flood in the river Indus did not have a negative impact. And that because of all that we managed the flood in the appropriate manners. And we received the information well in time. Another thing that in the Punjab, this time we received the flood in the two districts, one in the Didi Khan and other in the Rajanpur. And because of these floods were because of the hill torrents, flash floods were occurring. And this time the magnitude of flood was the highest ever received in the hill torrents. And what the department has learned, and after that we received the flood 2014 in the river Chenab. That was the second highest flood ever received in the river Chenab. And after the 2014, we carried out many kind of interventions in the Punjab. First of all, the major vital structures that we have are the barrages. We enhanced the capacity of the barrages, especially at the Trimu headworks, where both the rivers Jhelum and the Chenab join on the upstream of the Trimu headworks. And similarly, we increased the capacity of the Balloki headworks, and also we have rehabilitated the Taunsa, Janab Raj, and we constructed the new Khanki Barrage. So in other words, we can say that first of all, we saved our vital structures, and those structures are not only rehabilitated, but also we increased their capacity to receive more floods and did not have a negative impact as we were already seeing. And other thing we carried out, we in fact focused on our dikes, and we gave the protection of the dike to those dikes which were very close to the main towns and main cities, especially near the Multan, Jang, Muzaffargarh, and even first time in the Pakistan, even we inserted the sheet piles in the dikes for the protection of the major cities. This is in fact the first time intervention we have carried out in the province of Punjab. And similarly, we also strengthened our dikes on the other which were having the less impact for the protection of the local abadis. We also improved our own internal forecasting systems. Now we have the flood risk assessment unit in our irrigation department, and we are not only relying on the Met department. Of course, the Met department has improved as compared to if we just consider it with respect to compare it 2010. There is a major improvement in the Met department. But this time, after receiving the flood in the hill torrents, we are already carrying out a study with the assistance of the Asian Development Bank, the possibility of the dams in the hill torrents area, Kor Suleiman areas. We have started the construction of one dam, Soda Dam, which is in fact the tributary of the Sangad hill torrent, and we are also exploring the possibility of the other dams in that area. If we succeed to build the dams in the Kor Suleiman areas, and even we able to manage those areas not only with the dams, even with the dispersion structures, and also carrying out the disposal of the hill torrents water up to the river through the flood carrying canals, definitely this area will be swept in the near future. I mean, during the next 5 to 10 years.
Okay.
This will be
So just to summarize, I heard dams and dikes. I heard less managed aquifer recharge, some of the wetland restoration and so forth. But I also understand, because your mandate is the irrigated infrastructure. We do have to get to a few more panelists and a few more questions. But I just, a very quick, what comes to your mind, first thought for the other presentation that we had? If there is no more meltwater from the glaciers, which might happen, it's the age of our children, 2050s, 2060s, what would you change in the cropping pattern in the Indus Basin irrigation system once we have once the meltwaters are gone? So it sounds like there will be more dams and more dikes, so maybe more water storage from precipitation. But how would the cropping pattern look like?
We have established 3 new organizations in the department. The major thing is the Water Commission. That is the commission. In fact, that is not fully functional yet because there is some litigation in the courts. And the Water Commission will carry out the integrated approach for the management of the water, by considering all the aspects, the surface water, the groundwater, even the industrial water and the drinking water. All these aspects will be dealt by the Water Commission. And in fact, it is as per line of the National Water Policy, we have the Water Act in the Punjab. And hopefully after its functioning, all these things will definitely be improved. And all the cropping patterns and all these things, we will have to consider it in the serious manner in the near future.
Okay, thank you. I know I sometimes ask difficult questions, but thank you very much for your comprehensive response, and also important to know about the Water Commission. I'd like, because we are starting to be short of time, I'll take a last round of questions, and we'll try our honored guest, Engineer Ahmad Kamal, to give a response to as many of these questions as possible. So we now have 2 from the room, and I know we have, I think, another one online. So who has the mic for the questions in the room? We do need the mic. Yes, please. And introduce your name.
Yeah. Thank you. This is Zamir Ahmad Sumro from Asian Disaster Preparedness Center. Actually, the flood 2010 and this 2022 has major difference, that the damages in 10, mostly the damages were from the rivers. And in this scenario, 2022, so there were the 2 types of major damages. One was the rainfall, localized rainfall, and another mentioned by Mr. Bodla, hill torrents. Basically, so Mr. Bodla gave a good interventions by the government of Punjab in the light of the flood 2010, that they have widening the infrastructure and these things to have the preventions. But you see the hill torrents and your question, that if there will be no glaciers by 2060,
yes,
then there will be the rainfall.
Oh, and more rainfall. Okay.
There will be the hill torrents. So now at the federal level, Mr. Kamal is there, provincial layer, Mr. Bodla is there. So we should have a strict planning to harness the full potential of these hill torrents. The hill torrents, we are considering it as a disaster. But if we are able to manage these hill torrents, these are the opportunities to mitigate the droughts. So I would like to ask from both the professionals from at the federal level and provincial level, that what they are planning for future to harness these hill torrents.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Second question, and we really have very little time left, so we need to ask the question fast. Yes. Okay.
Yeah. I think we are not discussing about the glaciers gone by 2050s or 2060s. These are the peak water that because of the higher temperature, the accelerated melting, there will be more water coming from the glacier.
Right. Mm-hmm. Oh, we have a bit more time. That's good to know. Please.
I'm Saidur Rahman. My first question is from Mr. Ahmed Kamal. That as we know that riverbed of Indus Basin is higher in Sindh part, and whenever floods comes, water goes and it cannot come back. So as a river restoration and bonds making and all, why Flood Commission has not invested and thought on that side and project has not been made? Secondly, to Mr. Nathan, that you mentioned early warning system, and in this conference another issue was capacity building, because we are lacking in each department, and on technology side you have dealt, but you did not mention capacity building.
Okay.
So would you throw some light?
Thank you. While Engineer Kamal is going to answer the question, and Nathan will speak later at the coffee break because we are running out of time. I'm already also inviting Mr. Syed Safar Ali Shah, the Secretary of Ministry of Planning, Development and Special Initiatives, to join us here on the floor, because he will follow with closing remarks as soon as Engineer Ahmad Kamal has answered the other very important questions. Please join us. But over to you.
The floor, first of all, responding to Mr. Jamil Somro. Yes, his idea is quite correct. We are already working on it. Very recently, when this all had happened on ground, the highest administrative head of the country, the Prime Minister himself directed for including the hill torrents and the flash flood aspects in our National Flood Protection Plan 4, and we are developing that. And for that very purpose, we already have received projects worth more than 221 billion rupees from the province of Punjab, as well as about 185 billion from the province of Sindh. They are already working on that. And if we do that thing, we are going to have a lot much water saved and lot much water to be utilized for the communities which are living on both sides on those particular areas where all this havoc had happened. Secondly, with regard to, sir, your question that why the Federal Flood Commission has not invested with regard to, the Sindh area, we just need to have a clear concept about the things on ground. This time, what had all happened on ground was the bad maintenance of the drainage system in the province of Sindh. There is a very good compartmentalization of embankments, first line of embankment and second line of embankments on both sides of the Indus River, worth more than 1,300 kilometers in the province of Sindh. But what had happened or what had gone wrong was that there is a system of LVOD, there is a other drainage system, but there is no connectivity between them. The drainage system, that is LVOD, was under-designed. It should have been designed for taking water to the tune of more than 15,000 cusics, and it has been designed only for taking water for 3,500 cusics. So that was the major mistake probably that the planner as well as the designers has made at that time. Had that problem was not there this year, we could have averted much more damage. The second thing is that now it is perhaps on the top of the list that we need to have a very good drainage master plan for the province of Sindh, so that if such thing happens again in future, there should be a very good, you can say, flow of water connected one with each other with sort of a fuse plugs and all that, so that water is easily, can be made its exit into the main Indus River. Lastly, there is a lot of water that is coming from the Balochistan side through small rivers in the form of a hill torrents and all that. All that water when come, there is a Hamal lake and down there is a Manchar lake. And in between there is a FP band or the flood protection band. When that water comes, that water retains there, and when a certain height is reached, we need to make a breach in that, and then in the successive bund system, we need to make the breaches, which had been done this year. So one concept that is being discussed this time is how and why not we connect the Hamal Lake and the Manchar Lake with the form of some sort of a channel, so that when a water comes, that water will not enter into the main body of the drainage system. It will enter into the Manchar Lake, and from the Manchar Lake, it has got two regulators. One is the tail regulator, and the first one is the head regulator. They are about 2 or 2.5 feet in their breadth. Why should not we increase them to 10 or 15 or 20 feet in their breadth, so that they can release more water? Presently 25,000. We can design it to 200,000 or 250,000 cubic. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Very detailed engineering information. I'm a social scientist, but it does sound very interesting and very important. So now we come to our closing remarks, and I hope they are along the lines of the 3 areas we have discussed. How can we avoid the level of adverse impacts that the poor in Pakistan and others as well, but the poor particularly have experienced from the current flood? How can we avoid that? What is the number one investment to deal with recurrent floods? And once we have passed peak glacier melt, which is between 2050 and 2080, that's the peak glacier melt, what is the future of Pakistan's irrigation and agriculture? Over to you, please.
Thank you very much. I'm Syed Zafar Ali Shah, Secretary Planning, and by training now I am a bureaucrat, and by posting I am a planner, but my first degree was engineering also. So I will try to combine all the elements. And I think it's very important, a very important conference on water, and I have to summarize in a short time, but I think the topic is really vast. If we talk about water in Pakistan itself is a vast topic. When I was just coming here, and because I was rushing from a National Assembly Standing Committee where I had to answer the members of Parliament, I said I had to go to a water conference. I said, what should I tell quickly here? And I heard some of the points already being said by some of our members, like some developments, very positive developments that have taken place, where we have thought a lot more about water and its importance. We always took water for a very long time as a free kind of commodity, like we take air or other commodities as free commodities. But some distance has been traveled, the Water Act, the water policies that were mentioned. When we talk about them, I recall my stint as a staff officer, almost you can say as a young officer 20 years back, with Mr. Shamsul Mulk. I think many of the Pakistan engineers will know he's a water expert and has designed a lot of dams, was minister. And so in 2002, I was his staff officer as an engineer. And he tried to form a water conservation body. And at that time, it was something ahead of everything in the country. It was in the KPK province. It was designed so that we take account of all the water in the aquifers also. So the aquifers were to be maintained. Any tubewell that would be coming out will be maintained. So just to give the due importance to water. Somehow that body could not be done in 2002. I still recall his words. He said, 10 years down the road, 15 years, people will rue the fact that we didn't make it. But now I'm happy, 18, 19, 20, the landscape. I was again in KP, so involved in the Water Act of KP and the water policy. So this landscape has at least improved in the water sector. But still, there's so much that we can talk about. Some of our friends, like the flood response, that was mentioned. When we take climate change and climate resilience, again, we are talking about everything under the sun. So when we talk about some resolution as a planner, and this is very recent debate in the last 2 months, because of floods, we have been talking about these pertinent aspects. So we would say something the world has to do, like that is our claim that we are the sufferers of the climate change, and climate resilience has to be brought about in the world. The world has to live up to its commitments, yet because we are the greatest sufferers of this climate-induced disaster, which we assume that it's maybe about $30 to $32 billion damage and loss it has caused to us. So we need to do a lot more. So while I said in the water landscape, we have brought in some frameworks and some effort is there, some emphasis is there, institutes like the Water Management Institutes and others playing their role, the civil society also, but still a lot more has to be done if we are just talking about water. Coming to climate resilience, again, we have some policies here and there. The very important aspect, I think, which we have missed, and maybe the world is also coming to that a bit later, is to act on those policies. Just today, we were in a meeting with the UNRC, and he presented us, it was again Ministry of Climate Change plan, Indus Basin climate plan. It was about $18 billion. Excellent, everything, it was covered, 25 points in that. When we faced the flood disaster, we had a discussion with our friends. We discovered the 2017 National Flood Response Plan, which was at that time $2 billion. Now we are rehashing it to bring it into the present needs, so it must be around $5 billion in the next 3-4 months. The difficult part, which we didn't do, and which we had to do, and because of that we suffered, we didn't make those responses in time. So we had to face the current disaster of 2022, which is higher in dimensions, 33 million people affected, and I said $32 billion of just damages and the losses that we suffered. So a wholesome exercise is required, which we are undertaking right now. The different bits and pieces are already there. The thinking has been there. I think that it's very important to bring everything together, one. Second, also to translate it into reality on the ground. That is something which we have been missing. I will just share you the latest that is happening because I'm privy to that information. And maybe some of that I can't disclose before Friday. But maybe like good journalists, they have some breaking news, so I will give you some breaking news. Yeah. So so what is happening is, and I think this is maybe a wholesome thinking that is coming into place. We suffered again. We had the 2010 some plans, but now we completed one exercise which is called the post-disaster need assessment. Again, we used international expertise. Capacity building word was used. We have the capacity. I remember from my engineering books, when we started, all the irrigation theorems were developed within the subcontinent in the 1920s and 30s. And the Indus Basin network, so a lot of knowledge is here already. I think it's, and now we have people exposed to the international best practices. People are traveled around the world. So a lot of knowledge is there. The point again is from a planning perspective to bring a coordinated plan, one, and then translate it into ground with resources and also with the kind of priority that it really requires. So those are the missing elements. With the PDNA exercise, and we have the flood response also, that covered, like our coordinator or convener, she just mentioned all the elements. Because, say, in Pakistan, if you look at the land space, NDMA did the relief and rehabilitation part. Parts of rehabilitation, part of relief. The provinces did. The PDMAs are now vibrant bodies in that respect. But again, everybody had to come together in a platform which we call the National Flood Response Center. It was based on COVID experience NCOC. So that was, which is headed by the Prime Minister, the Planning Minister was the chair. So the relief part, the rehab part, supported by international development partners, UN coming in, and other also multilateral and bilateral partners coming in. So that exercise we have taken to a certain level. Now the rehabilitation part is a major exercise ongoing, which includes the health, taking care of the children, of the mothers, of the houses damaged. And then we are moving into the medium to long term. Whatever we are planning in reconstruction, we plan to do it in a climate resilient way. So the PDN exercise is bringing all the damage assessment. It also gives us a basis, which is a minimum of $16 billion or thereabouts of our needs to redevelop the houses, the livestock, the agriculture that was lost, the various sectors, the infrastructure that was damaged, including highways and railway structure. But what we are going to add, and maybe it will happen in the next fortnight, is, and this PDNA officially will be launched on Friday, but in the next 2 weeks, we are going to add the reconstruction plan also to it, which is the government of Pakistan vision, not only to do the damage need back, which is the relief and rehabilitation part, but the reconstruction, which is be climate resilient. Now, what is that? One, I said, we don't have to reinvent the wheel every time we face a crisis. We had the 2010 crisis, 17, excellent document, which we got from the Flood Commission. They did it. And interestingly, it not only talked, although we were hit by the river flood, it also talked about every torrent in Pakistan. So although the focus was not much on the torrents which hit us this time, but it talked of both. So that plan was there, and I recall that 35% was on measures which are not structural, because structure is a major problem. We have to build structures. We have to train waters, retrain water, and prevent our DRR, disaster risk reduction elements, but also non-structural. One element, and again that leads us into the governance field, River Act. We developed that in 2017, some provinces did earlier. But again, if you reconstruct in the waterways, the water is going to hit you back. And like in Balochistan and Sindh, because they were used to these for 20 years, these areas were dry river streams or streams. So they had just constructed a lot of houses there. So that is again our challenge. In the reconstruction, do it a climate resilient way. Can we go for elevated platforms? We started like Bangladesh recently, the floating houses, the community kind of structures. So those kind of international knowledge is coming back to us. Like I said, in the PDNA, we were helped by international development partners. They were fronted by World Bank, Asian Bank, experts from all around the world, the EU and the UN. And again, in this exercise, reconstruction, some elements are already in front of us. One is the flood response plan, which we are updating, which covers a lot of elements, including the people element also, involving the community, the governance element beside the structures. But in addition to that, we are also looking, just two big examples. Indus Highway, which is like almost another lifeline of Pakistan, it was damaged 800 kilometers. And now, as engineers, we know that high flood level defined by 2010 has entirely changed again for us. So the cross drainage works, the raising of the Indus Highway, which is 800 kilometers, ML1 already in a very bad condition, the main train tracks. Now that needs to be rehabilitated. It was badly hit in Sindh province, inundated. So entirely its design has to be changed in a climate resilient way, so that we can expect next year, few years down the road, again such disasters. Glaciers were mentioned, that is one element. Then there were elements of, again, which we couldn't do in time. That was the advanced warning system, the radars, and the placing of some of the radars on the rivers and streams, plus on the glaciers also. So all that was planned, was thought of in different parts, but the implementation and the resources couldn't follow. So I think the change that we are going to have to do is bring everything together in the PDNA, the reconstruction exercise, and just to tell you the roadmap also, we, whatever projects now are coming, and our present portfolio also, we are going to refocus on reconstruction in a climate resilient way, trying to educate the people also, awareness, because the houses, mostly you understand, we can't build them for them. It will be the people building it again. And 2 million houses damaged is no small amount. So that is there, 16 of the 20 poorest districts, which we targeted for uplifting, were again hit in this flood. So the people have to be taken on board. This PDNA plus reconstruction exercise has to come in. And then you know that we are taking it to COP also, this report or the basics of it. And also we will be having international conferences later, which will be supported by UN, our international friends. So the Pakistan government is going to really provide that resources along with all the provinces and all the divisions wherever they are. In all this, the theme will be climate resilience and how to bring everything together in a much better way so that our people don't suffer another crisis like this. Thank you.
Okay, wow, very comprehensive planning. So a hand to our closing speaker, but also to all of the panelists and also to our speakers at the beginning. So I think a very exciting session. We've heard a lot. I think the key really is the comprehensive integrated planning. So I think if all of these things will come together, the next flood that will come for sure will have lesser impacts, and we will be watching. So thanks to everyone again, and this closes our Nexus Gains 5th seminar. Thank you very much. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.